Welcome to the Deep Dive into Agile Marketing Podcast with your host, John Cass. Together, we'll take a closer look at the ins and outs of marketing through an Agile lens. You'll learn from interviews with top Agile thought leaders and practitioners and gain fresh new insights for your journey. Let's get ready to dive in.
Welcome to the Deep Dive into Agile Marketing with John Cass. I'm your host, John Cass, here in Boston, Massachusetts. Today, I'll be talking with Travis Arnold, co-founder and CMO of Herefish, which was recently acquired by Bullhorn, who's based in Boulder, Colorado. Welcome, Travis.
Hey, how's it going, John? Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, I'm pretty well. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and I'm excited to talk with you because I think we've known one another. I don't know, when did we meet? Around 2010, something like that.
Yeah, if not right before, it's been at least 10 years, maybe 10 plus. So
great, and it was about in the early days of Agile marketing. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about your intersection with Agile marketing and also the Agile Marketing Manifesto. So let's start off. What was your journey to marketing and Agile marketing?
So journey to marketing is kind of convoluted. Started at a big Fortune 100 company on a arm of the marketing team, and then moved into software, and that software company was kind of really immature in the marketing, kind of the life cycle of where they were. So they were just kind of starting digital. Like I had kind of grown up in the digital world. This was like 2006, 7, 8 timeframe. And so, we started just kind of, doing the basics, putting some time into SEO, PPC. It was pretty new back then as well. And then we started noticing that, at a software company, your tech teams are always shipping products for largely the same person. They're just in a little different spot in their journey with the company. And so it seemed more efficient. It's that more agile and Scrum. And so why don't we kind of adopt that on the marketing side? We were a smaller team. This is pre 2008. We were small and had a small budget. So this kind of set us up for maybe a future question. But we were just trying to ship as much of the right stuff quickly and efficiently, and assessing the performance of that, and then iterating on top of it. That's kind of where it all started, like the mindset that we had back then, when we kind of started talking about this in like an agile marketing perspective.
And so you got into it and found benefits, and then I think one of the things that I've always found with you, Travis, is that you read a lot and so forth. So were you also sort of searching around and trying to find out what other marketers were doing at the same time? Yeah,
for sure. At that time, it was a pretty small group. I think you were one, Frank Days, Jim Ewell, Yasha. I mean, there was like 4 or 5 people that had written some stuff about it. And I started sharing some thoughts like, okay, here's how I'm approaching this from a, small company, small budget, small team perspective. And then started looking at that. I was like, there's some parallels here. There's some overlap on like what Jim is talking about, or what Frank is talking about, or what you're talking about. And so then it just kind of, that community started like growing as a very small group of like-minded individuals, started, kind of chatting and getting together. And I think that's where we got to, Sprint Zero, and kind of led up to that. So.
That's right. So we put together that Sprint Zero conference in 2012. And as part of that, one of the goals of it was to come up with our own version of the Agile Marketing Manifesto. I think part of that was that we started seeing a number of people posting Agile Marketing Manifestos. Can you tell me about, how that all came about? Your work with some of the other writers in the community, how you put together the material so that Jim could work on the workshop and the actual conference?
Yeah, for sure. Kind of like I said, there was 6 or 7 folks that had put put out there, like, here are the guidelines as I see them, or here's what I'm seeing agile marketing look like. So those, 6 different thoughts, six or 7 different perspectives. So what I did is took all those and kind of read through them all, listed like their kind of key points out, and then started putting together, okay, here's the overlaps between these. Here's like a bucket that we could pull from for Sprint Zero. And then they basically summarized each one. So like, here's kind of like the meat and potatoes of this post and what we're really trying to say. And those like 6, 7 things became, largely turned into the 6 or 7 values that we have today that were voted on and kind of looked at during Sprint Zero in 2012.
Perhaps we could go through a couple of the values and principles. Do you think, and also I wanted to ask the question, do you think they're as relevant today?
Yeah. Let's go through them for sure.
How about on values, many small experiments over a few large bets?
Yeah. I mean, that one to me is like, it's kind of I think if we back it up a little bit, it's like, Agile, you just kind of have to adopt this iterative mindset. You can't, I think a lot of marketers grew up in this like waterfall. Here's our, 10 to 12 page marketing plan every year. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to execute on. But a lot of that's like based like months and months and months ahead of time. Like marketing conditions completely change. Obviously, we have a really good use case of that. If you did your marketing plan in November of 2019, then tried to execute on that throughout 2020, you're probably screwed. There has to be some agility thrown in. So when you think of that, it's like that kind of throws that out of the door right away. And then you think about like, let's iterate on some small things. Like let's rather than redoing an entire website or redoing an entire campaign, let's tweak one thing of that. So let's change the homepage, or let's change email number 3 subject line. Let's always be testing something, because that's going to help us build on top of success. So it's like we had one success. Okay, that was like incremental. We only rose by 1 or 2%. Like let's keep pounding on that until we get like the best result out of this part of that campaign. And that's kind of where I see it. It's like it's just really adopting that. It's obviously there's the tactics of like let's experiment and test, all the time. But there's also like a mindset of like we're going to build something, and there's probably going to be parts of this that are going to be wrong, but that's okay, because we're going to iterate and we're going to test kind of every edge of it, and then we're going to have the best result once we're done.
Well, isn't that something? If you're doing the small experiments, you're much more likely to find out if incrementally you have some successes. But it also means that if you start going down an area where you're not having successes, it's going to be easier to retrieve it. Whereas if you spend a lot of resources on a large bet, then and it doesn't work, that was a bigger waste, right?
Yeah, Crystal Pepsi, right? So it's you have Crystal Pepsi was the next best thing. A lot of tons of resources, and they just pushed it out. And it's like, this doesn't really, it's not that great. It kind of sucks. So you look at that at like a software company. We've all seen that products come out, and they're like, yeah, this really isn't doing the right stuff. It's not, we didn't have a great persona in mind when we built it. We just built it because we thought it was cool, and a lot of time, effort, and energy was involved. And we didn't find out up front that, hey, this kind of sucks and it's not the right thing we should be spending time on. So you're 100% correct. Like you find out the good, and you also find out the bad, which you have to be willing to, when you do find out the bad, to go ahead and kind of murder your darlings. Like we had talked about this earlier, but you got to be okay with this thing that you spend a little time on. Like, okay, that sucked. Like we're throwing it away, and we're going to move on to something else.
I do like that phrase, murder your darlings. So how about validated learning over opinions and conventions? How do you think that's relevant today?
Yeah, I think you've got, there should always be this like learn, implement measures that we have on Agile Marketing Manifesto, but you should always be touching base with the people that are kind of beneficiaries of what you're building. So if that's current customers, you need to be talking to them. If it's prospective customers, you need to be talking to prospective customers and assessing what that market's going to need. And then you like go through and like, okay, this is what we know and this is what we've learned. So rather than thinking like this is what they probably mean, like let's just hear it from the horse's mouth and start build that profile and build that persona out. And if that means it bucks a convention, that's okay. Like if there's if there's something that your audience is telling you like, hey, this is what we really need, and you're still adhering to kind of this old school way of doing things and not willing to adjust to this new way of like buying or behavior, then there's somebody that is, and they're going to kind of leave you in the dust at some point.
Yeah, this one I really think speaks to customer journey mapping and having marketers go back and revisit that on a regular basis. Not. I mean, I wonder how many people really do that, but
totally, yeah, it's not static, right? So like you might do like it's easy to go do a couple interviews with people and then okay, this is what we learned in 2010, right? And you might not ever visit that. Well, 10 years later, things have changed. Like how we use the web has changed. How we use apps and devices has changed. So there needs to be some sort of process in place where you are consistently tapping into who's using your products, and at least you have a telephone with that person and have them kind of consistently giving feedback or grabbing feedback or from them.
Customer-focused collaboration over silos and hierarchy. Doesn't that get into the discussion about small and large companies as well, just because there's probably more silos?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this one kind of seen firsthand both ways. So obviously my bailiwick and background is on kind of the smaller side of the house. Like you mentioned in the beginning, we were acquired at the beginning of the year by a much bigger company. And so it's you start to see the walls of the silos that didn't exist when you're kind of an agile company, not just an agile marketing department. Your whole company's agile when you're 10, 12 people. But when you have 2,000, 3,000 people, that's a very different thing. So I think it's easy to get away from what the actual problem you're trying to solve is. And then it's also easy for teams to work independently and basically be duplicating work when there's really no need to. We can all kind of share resources. And that, to me, that's just opening up lines of communication, sharing that tribal knowledge. That's super important, especially as you start to get to a giant organizational scale. And again, at the root of that, it's the customer. It's what they need, what they want to buy, what's really going to kind of push the needle forward for them and make their experience better should be at the core of all this, not what somebody in department A thinks or somebody in department C thinks.
Well, doesn't it mean, especially for larger companies, again, I suppose for any organization, mean that you really have to think carefully about how you're structuring a team or the different teams so that they can work together? And you just mentioned that a moment ago about whether you're duplicating work or not. So have you seen some examples of that, or do you think is that one of the problem areas you think that Agile can help solve?
It is, I think you have the concept of cross-functional teams, and I think a lot of times cross-functional people are like, oh, well, that's like a designer and a developer together, and maybe a project manager. But like sometimes those like a project manager on the PMK side and a project manager on the UX side, those people can collaborate. They're pretty much the same role, just in different sections. But if you can't get all the teams together talking all the time, then at least at minimum you can have some kind of tribal knowledge getting shared across the silo lines with kind of an executive sponsor, executive leader. So yeah, I do think it can help. I've seen teams come together, teams of 3 to 5, crush stuff. Like they just building left and right and building the right things, not just building for the sake of building. So I've seen that come together, and in big companies. So you have, some companies are kind of adopting this, like, at Bullhorn, it's called the Emergent Technologies Group, but it's basically a cross-functional team that's like pulling and straddling between, super innovation and then the kind of the classic department. And I think that's starting to seeing some benefits of moving faster on the right things. It's kind of a loose agile mindset, and not necessarily just in marketing, but it's starting to kind of weave its way into different departments. So it's pretty cool.
So as part of the Agile Marketing Manifesto and for the Sprint Zero event, you went out, you looked at different writers and put the materials together. How did you work on that whole process, and who were some of the people that you referenced?
The whole process has been a few years. I'll have to go back and check it out, but really, I think it came from my own kind of discovery, trying to find out who was talking about agile marketing. And then what were they thinking about? Because I was writing kind of independently, writing some stuff about my thoughts and experiences and observations of it. Again, it's like 2009, 10. And then it was going out and finding who else had been writing about it. So I think Yasha and obviously Jim were two that had kind of their thoughts out there. And I'm blanking on some of the other names that I looked into.
Oh, maybe Scott.
Yes, Scott Brinker for sure. Yeah, he had a ton out there. He was one of the first technologists, classic technologists, but also like had jumped the chasm into the marketing world. And how do you pull from what you learn as a technologist into this marketing world? And I think, obviously you still see him today, he's at HubSpot, I believe, and still like pushing that forward. And back then it was like, there's similarities here. We have to define them. And that's what ultimately led to, kind of the consolidation of, the roundup of Agile Marketing Manifestos. And then that was like the board we could pick those first values off of to vote on at Sprint Zero. So I wasn't able to attend Sprint Zero, but helped on the planning side of it. And it's really cool to see, okay, everybody had like independent work, and now we have as a kind of a collective, here's the 7 values that we feel are the most relevant and the most representative of what we're trying to do as a movement.
I think we should continue the process and go back and look at it, either refining it or seeing if there's anything that we need to add. I'd also like to see some of the differences between a description of the differences between marketing and dev. What are those differences between marketing and dev for the approach to Agile?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think the timeframes can. This is kind of a crappy answer, I know, but it's like, I think the time frames are usually a little shorter, but they could be a lot longer. So by that, I mean, you might have a 1 week, hey, here's some content pieces we need to crank out because, we need to fill the blog. We have email content. We have, a resource we want to get out the door. And that might just be a week time frame that we're working in, and we're building, we're assessing, we're assessing. You have your daily stand-ups. You're making sure you're on the right track. And you start on Monday, and on Friday you have 7 things to ship. That's great. But you could also, on the flip side of that, have a much bigger project. So say a website redesign or completely campaign overhaul. Like those things don't fall within like a 1 or 2 week sprint period. They usually last 2 or 3 months. And so how do you take these big things and chunk them out? You still get to use agile methods to do that. But the final result, the final big push might not be for a few months down the road. Whereas if you worked in just 2 week sprints, you might, conceptualize an idea on day 1, and on day 14, you've got something that gets launched out the door. So I think that's probably the difference. You have at Herefish, we had kind of like a continuous development. So we had 2 week sprints, and we were always shipping something every 2 weeks. But on the marketing side, we didn't necessarily mirror that. It'd be, we might work in a week sprint for some things. We might work in 3-week sprints for others.
Oh, that's interesting. That is really interesting. We also talked a little bit about the differences between big and small companies, and I know you've had some experiences with that. What do you think? How do you think the size of the company affects how a team approaches, or different teams approach Agile for marketers?
Yeah, I think as a small team, so kind of 3 different variations of it. So as a small startup team, so like I said, we had 12 employees when we were acquired. Our whole company was Agile. So it wasn't just like marketing was Agile, everybody was Agile. So we were always kind of testing. We had kind of shared responsibilities of talking to customers, assessing what was working, what wasn't, and then taking that and creating kind of the next best thing. So some of that could be marketing. We were, hey, this isn't working. Let's build something new. Or on the dev side, hey, this is something we're finding how people are trying to use it. Let's build something that kind of creates less friction when they're trying to build something. So that was like a small startup world. In a 40 user company, which was kind of send outs days, that was probably 10 years ago. That was marketing and dev were very Agile. And so that's where we kind of shared, ideas with one another. Obviously, like I said earlier, the web teams, the development teams had adopted Agile first, and then we kind of started seeing like the parallels on the marketing side and adopted that framework and mindset. And then as we move into a big company, it's like, I think you have to try a lot harder. And I think there needs to be like some executive sponsorship that has to happen. And there's definitely leaders that have that mindset of like, okay, yeah, let's build cross-functional teams. Let's break down some silos. And it's just harder to see like, and again, a small company, you see it like immediately. A big company, it just takes a lot longer.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's been interesting to see the development over the last couple of years. More and more companies taking on, but bigger companies, and how they're handling that growth. How they're because I think it's one thing to have a smaller company or a small team and have it adopted, but it's another thing to have a larger company where you're trying to push adoption with hundreds or not thousands of people. So it's a whole different kettle of fish.
Oh yeah, no question.
Are there any other things that you can think about the Agile Marketing Manifesto? I mean, do you think that we should have another run at it and more ideas about how we approach the description for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be fitting to kind of reevaluate, reassess. It's like it's at its core, it's iterative, right? So our first version might not be the best version, but it's what we had. It's what we decided on at the time. Fast forward, 8 to 10 years. It's probably let's look at it. What's changed in the world? Where did we get wrong? What did we get right? What can be consolidated, maybe, or expanded on? So I definitely think there's like the value should always be up for discussion and debate. On the principles as well. I know we didn't really flesh those out too much, but there's definitely we have the proposed principles, and my favorite is principle number 10, which is simplicity is essential. So it's like I'd love to expand on that. What's that really mean? I think I see a lot of marketing teams overcomplicate things. It's kind of that waterfall mindset. It's hard to shake sometimes. It's let's build the most complex, convoluted thing versus let's start with something small and something that's super simple for somebody to adopt and understand, and let's get it out there and let's see what the performance is, and let's iterate on that versus let's try to do everything all at once. And I feel like that's what what happens. People get underwater really quickly on bigger projects because they try to do it all at once. It's just not possible.
And it is really all about being focused and getting the work out rather than trying to spend too much time on stuff that, while it may work, it may not. And so therefore a faster speed's better.
Yeah.
I was also thinking, it reminds me of SEO and web design. Simplicity is essential. That's almost a statement for web design.
No question. It's try to keep things as clutter free. There's only so much mental load somebody can take, right? So let's take as much of that away as possible, and let's break things up in logical places on websites, and let's make it easy for people to kind of navigate how they should on a website versus throwing a bunch of speed bumps and hurdles in their way. If our whole goal is to get somebody to convert on a site, why do we make it so hard? And I think a lot of people, they ask, 10 questions on a sign up form, or they put buttons in weird places and nothing's consistent. So I definitely think there's a lot to pull, and that it's directly applicable to like kind of the tactics and output that marketing teams are charged with that can be pulled from here.
Well, Travis, our time is drawing to a close here, so I really appreciate you taking some time to chat with me about these issues, and I look forward to perhaps working on that Agile Marketing Manifesto version 2. I also understand you've actually been furthering the project by helping publish some of the translations as well. What other languages do you have there?
Yeah, we have. So right now we have a great community feedback on Spanish, French, Italian, Turkish, Japanese, German, and our latest 2 are Finnish and Swedish. So we have those values. Those values are translated. That's on agilemarketingmanifesto.org. And then we're always, like I said, I recently just kind of pushed up a clear, more 2020 version versus the 2011 version of the manifesto. But yeah, if you have translations, send them my way. I'm happy to get them up on the site, and then just spread the word throughout the globe.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Thanks for being such a resource for the community and helping to evangelize across the world as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah, man. Love it.
Well, Travis, thank you so much. We'll talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive into Agile Marketing with John Cass. My thanks to Travis, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Deep Dive into Agile Marketing podcast. Be sure and subscribe to our show and leave a review to let us know what you thought of today's episode. And if you like what you heard and want to learn more, visit www.businessagility.institute.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the Boys Club of Advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.